Welcome to Fix SLP, the podcast shaking up the field of speech-language pathology. We're calling out the barriers that hold clinicians back, fixing broken systems that limit our care, and giving the power of our profession back to the people who live it every day. This is where fearless clinicians come together. It's time to change the field with our voices, leadership, and advocacy leading the way.
So let's fix SLP.
Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Jeanette. It's been a little bit. It's been a minute since I've had a podcast. May-December took over my life. I think a lot of you saw I had a family member in the ICU, which spiraled right into summer and caregiving. And I have been working on a few things behind the scenes, but also continuing to track our 92507 issue. So we're here today. I should mention, I'm coming to you from our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Because of my work with Fix SLP, I was nominated for and then elected to be a voting delegate at the Girl Scouts of the USA Triennial Business Meeting. So I'm actually back at the same convention center that Asha was at this year, listening to 13-year-olds debate rules that are very tiring. So it is 10 p.m. We are going to try to keep this as brief and as direct as possible. I have two guests with me today. I have Rick Gawenda back. I know you've all been waiting to hear from Rick. And I have my friend Emily Watkins. Rick, I'm going to have you remind everybody who you are, and then Emily, I'll have you share about who you are and what you do.
Thanks for having me, Jeanette. Rick Gawenda. I am a physical therapist, believe it or not, for 35 years. So I kind of grew up in the hospital system. I worked my way into hospital administration. And also my wife and I and another business partner had a couple private practices that were PT only, had those for 17 years. But also during all that time, for 23 years, a consultant in outpatient PT, OT, and speech therapy, really to kind of the business compliance side. So the documentation, the coding, the billing, denials, appeals, etc. And a pretty good background on how a CPT code becomes a CPT code and how it gets valued, and helping businesses prepare, budgets and get ready for that next year when payment changes.
Well, thank you for having me. I am actually on vacation right now, so bear with me. But I'm Emily Watkins. I'm a speech therapist by trade. I have had a peds outpatient clinic for, I'll just say since 2018. Y'all can do the math, but less than 10 years, more than 5, somewhere in there. We do PT, OT, speech, and I have 2 locations. I'm very passionate about helping business owners. I think that peds outpatient is something very special, and I think that it should be preserved, and it's just something that's always been a part of me since I was in graduate school, but it's really impacted me in the last, obviously, couple of months, especially as much as everybody else. So I'm here to help, I'm here to educate, I'm here to learn, but I'm also here, as a business owner that, obviously wants to see us continue to thrive.
And you can find Rick Gawenda Seminars is his social media handle, but Emily has been really involved. Fix SLP is a business page, so you can't go there and have discussions. Emily, tell us the name of the Facebook group that you started.
It is Speech Therapy Advocacy Alliance. I started that just as a place to where I could help disseminate information with a lot of this 92507 and create discussion, but also clear up some misinformation. I feel like I have good networking with being at conferences and a ton of business owners across the country that are brilliant, and experts like Rick, and you have been integral in this too. And so I felt like it was the time for a national page for advocacy that we could have some conversations. So we just started that. I think we almost have like 5,000 members, which is insane. Never thought it was going to be that, but I'm really excited about it. And really, I'm more excited that we can help each other out and through this, but in other things. There's going to be other things come up. This is not going to, unfortunately, this is not going to be the last. So I just think it's a good way to connect with people.
Not connected with Fix SLP. I am not a moderator. I am in there and I will jump in, but it is Emily's thing. But it's a good way to kind of take the stuff you hear from Fix SLP and talk about things and process it together, because we can't really do that on my platforms because I don't have time to moderate. Okay, you just heard what I'm doing. So I asked Emily because she's private practice, pediatrics. I'm an adult person and I have very serious concerns, have been since the beginning, about how this is going to impact skilled nursing facilities. We will do a separate podcast on that maybe next week. I'll come to you. I have to have time to get my thoughts together because this hit me like it has hit all of you. I've had to process it as well. So I also want to say, lots of people were asking me for my immediate reaction after the codes were posted. I did a very short video and I will apologize. And I did say at the top of that little video and more than once, hey, I haven't had a chance to look at this. This is my first reaction. I will have time to process it and come back to you. So I did misstate that this G code would be required to be 60 minutes. That was a mistake that I made, so I apologize for that. I have been able to now read and learn and talk to Rick and talk to others. So we're going to bring you correct information, or at least as well as we can today. And what I want to start with that we'll have Rick answer, we've got values for our 10 sets of codes, but then this surprise G code turning sort of not really modifying, but kind of replacing 92507 for pediatrics, which is 0 to 21. But I think most SLPs don't understand who that applies to. So Rick, G code only, not the 10 codes. G code, tell us who that applies to right now as it stands and how it might impact some of the other insurances.
So, obviously CPT codes, they have to go through the AMA process, the RUC and all of that. This G code that Medicare, surprised us all with, I think in this proposed rule that came out Tuesday, July 14th, I think surprised us all. So this G code really, it's just goes through what we call, the Medicare rules making process. So the CMS, decided based on feedback and comments they received, in my opinion, from speech language pathologists that reached out either to CMS or reached out maybe to their representative or senator, etc. And then they said something to CMS. So CMS came up with this G code. This goes through the Medicare rules making process. It's GSLPP. So basically GSLP and then the extra P, and it's a HCPCS code. And basically, this is now open for comment. I do agree with you, Jeanette. It really takes the place of 92507 because if you look at the descriptor, it's the treatment of speech, language, voice, communication, auditory processing for pediatrics up to the age of 21. So those are the extra words that kind of got added in to that descriptor. Right now this is open for comment. So comments remain open on this whole proposed rule, the 10 new speech codes, the G code, and everything else, until September 14th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. If this, and then CMS would take all the comments, and then they would make a decision. Will they finalize what they proposed? Will they modify what they proposed? Or will they, based on feedback, not do what they proposed? That final rule is due out on or around November 1 of 2026. November 1 is a Sunday, which means most likely it will come out either the Friday, October 30th, or that early week of November 3rd, 4th, 5th. If CMS does finalize this G code, meaning it's going to exist come January 1 of 2027, it only mandatory applies to Medicare patients. State Medicaid programs do not have to use GSLPP. Your commercial payers, Aetna, Cigna, Blue Cross, etc., will not be required to use GSLPP. They could, or they could use, the 10 new codes that are coming out January 1 of 2027. So, that's, what people just mistake. They think this automatically is going to apply to everybody, and it's not. Obviously, insurers can decide to use it. Insurers can also decide not to use it, which I think now, because of this unknown, can make it very hard now for SLPs in pediatrics to try to create their budget for 2027. Obviously, we do know the monetary values of the 10 new codes for Medicare, what they're proposing. We know the monetary value of this code. If it does go through, assuming the conversion factor is what it is for next year, what they're proposing, and the RVUs don't change. So really the G code as proposed will pay about the same amount of money as the 30-minute base code for speech sound production. However, if you do speech sound production and language comprehension and expression, that combo code, that 30-minute base code, actually will pay more than that G code. And again, the unknown would be, if this does get finalized, what will the payers do in your state? And then also, how will they value that G code? Because that G code under Medicare took a significant hit. So, for 92507, this year the work RVU is 1.3. The practice expense RVU is 0.97. What CMS is proposing for 2027 for that new G code is still a 1.3 work RVU. Unfortunately, the practice expense went down to 0.71. So the total RVU and the malpractice stayed the same at 0.01. So this year, 92507, total RVUs are 2.28. Next year, for that G code, CMS is proposing 2.02. So kind of a long answer there.
It sounds like, just to simplify everything that you said, that there was some devaluation with this new code, but there is actually some opportunity to make a little more money with the combo code. So it's all dependent on what the insurance is and Medicaid adopts and what's being treated. So we don't really have all the information to state something one way or another. But I think you didn't say this. Overall, if people are thinking about what's best for their practice, it's hard to make that decision because we don't have all of the information yet, because we don't know what insurance companies are going to do. So it's hard to know.
Number one, you are correct on that. You don't know which code they may use. And then also, you can run many different scenarios, of course, but then you have to kind of, okay, here's what Medicare is proposing for payment. What percent is my Blue Cross going to pay? What percent is my state Medicaid going to pay? What percent is United Healthcare going to pay? You're going to have to try to figure that out. And I know Emily's, I'm sure, can give some input on this during the podcast as well.
Rick, Emily, one of you might know this. Would it be safe to say, or I guess this is a Rick question, would it be safe to say if people are trying to project, to take a look at the percentage of payments now, and would the insurance companies and Medicaid sort of follow what they're already doing? So if 92507 is $75, what is the decrease or increase? And is it safe to just assume that they would probably follow suit with this new code?
Yeah, so for example, let's say, and I'm going to make math a little bit simpler for myself. Let's just say Medicare was paying $80 for 92507. And your Blue Cross is going to be paying $88. Well, could you say that's 1.1 times Medicare? Now, whether Blue Cross intentionally did that or not, that I don't know. If another insurance is paying, only $70, does that mean they were paying maybe 88% of the Medicare physician fee schedule? So you're going to try to do that, and maybe you can figure it out also on your Medicaid. I think payers that pay on a per visit rate, where you just get a flat $70, $75 per visit, they may not change that payment because it's a per visit anyhow. So that may be a little bit easier to budget if you have a big payer mix of that. I think the tougher one is going to be that per CPT code one. And then also, I think you have to look at, do you typically only treat a child for 20 to 30 minutes? In which case, you might like that G code. Whereby if you say, well, Rick, I typically treat kids for 40 minutes, you might like the new code. The new codes, because you get the 30-minute base code plus the add-on 15-minute code, and definitely make more money than the G code that would be untimed.
Something that I didn't say at the top of the episode, I might even move this comment there. If you own a business and you're making billing and coding decisions and you're responsible for finances, this is really something you need to pay attention to. Individual practitioners in pediatrics need to be aware of this and still need to jump in, because this may affect your paycheck, right? So you need to be engaged. This is very important for business owners, but it's equally as important to be a part of this process, because we all want raises, but you don't want a huge decrease in your pay, because at the end of the day, especially in healthcare, and this is why I have concerns for skilled nursing facilities, if an employer takes a hit, it's not them that's going to take the hit. They're going to transfer that hit to us via productivity or decrease in benefits or decrease in compensation. So it is still your responsibility to understand, and ultimately your employer is going to tell you what they want you to do based on their business, but you still should be a part of the process at this point, because it's going to touch everyone in some way. We just said Medicaids may adopt it, they may not. So it also impacts school SLPs that are billing Medicaid. So this is touching everybody. We've said that. I've said that since the beginning. No one is exempt from this. We all have to be involved.
I was just going to piggyback off of what Rick said. From a business owner's perspective, talking about planning, what I did immediately when they came out is I looked at, okay, which one is giving me the biggest decrease? And the reason for that is exactly what you just said, is as a business owner, I have people that entrust me to create an environment and a paycheck and the ability for them to be able to pay their bills and their, mortgages. And I have given them a promise that I can sustain this. And so I make a lot of decisions right now that's way 5-10 years in the future. I've already made decisions for this year, next year, and the following year years ago. And so again, these are wrinkles that happen obviously with these new codes and whatever. But what I did is said, okay, how do I look at this as which one is the lesser of the two evils? Because neither one of them are like, given a choice, I don't want either one. I would rather just stay with what we're doing. Like, we would all want that. That's what I want. But we have which one is the lesser of the two evils? And that is the kind of mindset that I went after. It is, okay, let's figure out which one is most sustainable for me as a business owner. And if that means changing my operations a little bit, okay, so be it. Because guess what? That allows the people who are employed by PTP to continue to have a paycheck and continue to still get a raise every year. We do raises every year. And so that is my goal always, is putting my employees first, in the sense of how can I create a sustainable business, and how can I, even if it is a decrease, which one is going to impact my business the least? And so that is the mindset I took. It kind of is a reverse of which one pays more. It's because at the end of the day, we all know what this was about. This was not about, let's give SLPs a raise. OTPT, they already know they've been through this years ago. We haven't. We've been very lucky, but that's what this is about. There are budgets. They're trying to save money. There's a lot of budgetary things going on in the government at this time. So I know what this is about. It's just which way is going to impact you the least. And I think if you think about it that way, because it's going to happen, it's going to impact you. It's going to be painful. Either way. However, which one is going to impact you the least from a reimbursement revenue standpoint? And I think that is such a good mindset to have, so that you can really look at it from that perspective, so that your employees aren't affected as much either. Not only your business, but also your employees.
Yeah, I agree with what Emily said. I think you really have to look at it from your perspective, your practice, and what's best for you. Right now, based on all the proposals and the proposed payment amount next year for Medicare, if you look at that G code, you're looking at about $66.34 on a national average. And that's whether you do 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes. It's an untimed code. Where if you look at that speech sound production code for 30 minutes, which you got to do just 16 to get the bill to 30, that's 66.01. But if you say, Rick, I usually treat my kids for 40 minutes, when you get that add-on code, you're now up to $90 compared to $66.34. You do that speech, sound, language comprehension code by itself for 30 minutes, that I think is like just over $71. Do the add-on code, you're at $99.50 for 38 minutes. So again, you might want the 10 new codes if you say, well, we always do the 40 minutes, but if this G code goes and your state Medicaid adopts it, your other payers adopt it for pediatrics, well, you're at 66.34 on the Medicare side, and whatever it may be for your payers.
Right. So when thinking about the adoption of these codes, specifically for pediatrics, this isn't an adult thing. The adults are not included in this G code, but don't tune out because you still have to comment on this. Is this an either or situation, an either and? If an insurance company or a Medicaid adopts the G code, do we think the timed codes are still an option, or is it they're going to do both? Like, how do we see that playing out?
Well, I think when you look at Medicaid, most state Medicaid only covers, therapy for patients up to age 21. So obviously that would be the G code. Now, if there are some states that still have benefits for speech, above 21, they're going to use the new codes, in my opinion. When you look at an Aetna, Cigna, your Blue Cross, they're going to have to use, if they adopt the G code, they'll be using both, because they'll use a G code for patients up to age 21. They'll use the other 10 codes for 21 and over for the adults and geriatrics.
So that answered my question. It isn't for pediatrics. If they adopt the G code, it's not SLP pick your path. It's not, we're Aetna, we adopted the G code for pediatrics, but also we have the time codes for pediatrics. It would just be the G code and nothing else, correct?
I would fall off my chair if a payer adopts the G codes and says we got to use that for up to age 21. They're going to have to adopt the other 10 codes across for the adults.
Right.
If they do the G code, I think it's a G code for pediatrics, and they'll base the payment based on the age of the patient, on the claim form, date of birth and all of that would tell you which code you should bill.
I know we don't have a ton of examples, or none. We have no examples really of this happening with PT or OT. So it's, again, this is all speculation.
The only thing that really did happen back in, I think, 2003, the CPT code 97014, which is unattended e-stim. And back in, I think it was 03, CMS created 3 G codes, G0281, G0282, and G0283. And the 0281, 0282 were e-stim for wound care, and the G0283 was, e-stim for other than wound care. Sort of like a TENS, Hybo, galvanic, Russian stim, that kind of stuff. And they did that because they wanted to track why PTs and OTs were using e-stim. Now, most payers in 03 onward stayed with 97014. They did not adopt G0283. However, United Healthcare was one that did. United Healthcare did adopt G0283 for PTs and OTs in private practice. So we've seen it in terms of, okay, Medicare, we use G0283 for unattended e-stim. Most other payers, 97014. Could you do the same logic, GSLPP for pediatric speech, and then the other 10 codes for 21 and over?
You answered what I was going to ask. Do we foresee payers adopting this across the board? Do we think they'll all do it? So you just gave the example of what happened. Emily, I want to ask you as a business owner, again, and if anyone hasn't caught on, we're not telling you which is better today. Definitely not. We do have I will have some suggestions at the end, which include, if you don't listen to the end, I'll say now, you might want to continue to wait as we potentially gain more information. But again, we're working with what we have right now. Emily, as a business owner, do you see some problems if one payer takes a G code and another payer goes with the 10 codes? What are some potential downsides of giving payers the option to choose the time codes or the G code, and how that might impact billing practices in your business?
Most EMRs are set up where there's a flow of things. And so my concern with having options from an EMR and a workflow standpoint is that you're going to have to remember who is applying or who is adopting which set of codes. So you're going to have Blue Cross that's going to potentially adopt the time codes. You're going to, because like just because the G code goes through, I mean, I just want to vehemently say this, and please, somebody, Rick, tell me if I'm wrong. G code goes through, let's say, that does not mean that Blue Cross has to adopt it. And Rick said that, but I want to say it again very clearly, that there is a very good potential that Blue Cross, this is an example. Blue Cross decides they are going to go with the time codes because it's easier because they have to do adult and peds. And then UHC, well, they're a flat rate payer, they don't matter. And then you have the Medicaids. They decide they go with G because you know what? All we do is 0 to 21 anyway. And so just those two examples between Medicaid and Blue Cross, both of those are, I'm going to use those examples throughout my spiel here. You have EMR, you have to set up different back office, especially if you don't have a very sophisticated, highly advanced EMR, you're going to have to set this up on the back end of your EMR that these type of codes go with these payers and only this one. The other issue is, if you think about it, you got timed codes. Okay, timed codes. Okay, you're going to have to do, in my opinion, 32 minutes of therapy or 38 minutes of therapy, to make that worth it. Well, if you got a G code competing with that, it starts to become, it's going to hurt you in reimbursement, because then how in the world do you schedule 32, 38, 30 minutes? Because your G code is most profitable at 30 minutes or less, okay? Your timed codes, I've done the math, and we can get into this on another podcast, are most profitable at 40 minutes. How in the world, if you have these competing codes, you got timed versus untimed, that different payers are going to adopt, and that is, I truly believe that's going to happen. If this G code goes through, you're going to have different payers adopt different ones. Then how in the world do you schedule a 30-minute for the G code and a 32 to 38 for your timed codes? And not only that, but then how do you if you don't do that, then how do you make it profitable? Like, you start to cut into your profits to go, oh gosh, well, these percentage of patients are G codes and these percentage of patients are timed. You kind of are starting to see the problems that are going on in my head going, this is an operational nightmare from the standpoint of giving payers the option to choose. I don't want to give payers any options. I want to give them the least amount of options. I am not on their side ever. So I don't want to give them very many options. That's just my personal opinion. So then when you get into the operations of, the billing and the scheduling, I'm not sure a lot of people have thought about that. And so you really got to think through your org board or however you have your business set up, and how does this code affect my schedule? Is this G code going to be an option for payers? That is the question we have right now. I think the short-sightedness of this is, G code, that replaces 92507. We operate the same. It's not that simple. And I had thought the same thing when I saw it come out, and then I saw the payment of it, and I was like, okay, that's no. But I was like, okay, maybe we can operate the same. Because again, I want neither one of these. I want to stay with 92507. But I think you have to be very careful in realizing, adding this G code, what that truly is and what impact that has. It's not just, it's a replacement for 92507. Let's go and march forward, because that is not the case, because payers have options. Your schedule is impacted. Your revenue is going to be impacted. And so that is just, it's so important to do the math. But you know what? It's worth it when you can make it work, when you can realize that there's not as much of a decrease as you thought if you just change your operation a little bit. It's just really important to really think about every single department in your company, not just, this just matches 92507 and let's march on, because it's not that simple.
I think what I've heard Rick say and what I'm hearing, and I think understanding, so trying to simplify this for our listeners, basic 20-30 minutes, the G code might be better. You want that to go through, cool. But Rick, I imagine also that even if they all do adopt it, if there is that scenario, they're not all going to roll out at the same time on January 1. I imagine some Medicaids will be ready to go. Others will take longer. Private insurances might wait 3 months. Is that a safe assumption?
That's a very good assumption. It was, I had been preaching even before the proposed rule came out, the surprise G code, that, once the rule came out, we knew the 10 codes were coming. I was telling people, once this comes out, start contacting insurers, make them aware of these codes, the descriptors. You're going to see the RVU, proposed payment for Medicare. I was going to tell you to start July 14th, 15th. Well, now you got this G code. Well, it's going to be difficult to now go to your state Medicaid, to Blue Cross, to Aetna, and tell them, get ready for the codes because, well, the 10 codes are coming. You can still do that. You can't say much about the G code because you don't know if it's going to come or not come. And I guess if you get under the assumption that you think CMS is going to finalize it and you want to take a chance and do that, you can. But if not, this rule now comes out November 3rd, November 4th in there somewhere. Man, you got Thanksgiving, you've got the holidays, Medicaid's slow anyhow in a lot of states. You have some private payers behind. And I know Emily mentioned at the start, being a PT, we've gone through this year after year after year for my entire career. I can tell you when we have new codes come out, especially when we had the new eval codes come out back in 2017, there were some payers in February and March didn't have those new eval codes ready. So could this be an issue? Absolutely. Do I expect it to be an issue? And I'll speak for Emily. I think we both expect it to be an issue with some commercial payers and some state Medicaids.
So let's talk about some of the panic I caused with the 60-minute concern with the G code. There's a category. So the category is it's untimed, but every code has a rule. And so the rule states, it does state, we can read it, that it's an average of around 50 to 60 minutes, 50-minute face-to-face, 5 minutes post, 5 minutes prep for, non-face-to-face. And I think what I said understandably scared people that, if you weren't treating that your reimbursement could be cut in half. So again, my apologies. But let's unpack that a little bit because right now, everyone on the internet, 92507 has been that and it hasn't been an issue. Do we think it could be an issue now? And if so, why and how? Or do you think people are okay to go ahead and continue to treat 20 to 30 minutes without issue?
So again, every CPT code is comprised of 3 relative value units, one of them being a work RVU. Within that work RVU, there's a pre-service time, an intra-service time, and a post-service time. And 92507 has always been, for many, many years, 5 minutes pre-service, 50 minutes intra-service, meaning face-to-face treatment, 5 minutes post. So kind of the work RVU is kind of based on 60 minutes of, quote, time. Now, just because it's based on 60 minutes of time, it's an untimed code, does not mean from a billing perspective you have to do 60 minutes. It is untimed. So, obviously, could practices, could this new G code go through? It's based on the 5 pre, the 50 face-to-face, the 5 post, $66.34 next year right now, national payment amount. That can change, of course, but that's what I'm going by. Could you, for the next 3 years, do all your pediatric patients for 20, 30 minutes, build this G code, get paid the full amount, everything be fine? Absolutely. I mean, obviously, many SLP practices have been doing it for years and years with 92507. Now, with that being said, could something happen where Blue Cross in Louisiana decides to, not that Emily would do this, but, they audit Emily's charts and they pull 50 speech therapy charts and each have 20 visits in it. So 1,000 visits. In all 1,000 visits, the note says they saw the child for 30 minutes. And Blue Cross Blue Louisiana has been basing the payment on 60 minutes. Now, can they deny Emily? No, it's an untimed code. But if they go audit other speech therapy practices in Louisiana and they see that same pattern, could Blue Cross of Louisiana decide, what? We can't deny it's an untimed code, but could they maybe decide to change the work RVU for that code? So instead of being 1.3, could they say, well, gee, they're only spending 30 minutes, we'll make it 0.9, which then obviously would reduce the payment. Could that happen? It could. Have I seen it happen yet because of that? No.
A lot of what ifs.
You just jogged my memory with something that did happen with Blue Cross. All of a sudden in 2024, Blue Cross stopped paying for swallowing, feeding and swallowing for speech therapists in Blue Cross Blue Shield of Louisiana. All my Louisiana therapists, there's about 6 of us that are in a group text, and we tried to fight this. And I went round and round with that medical director, and he stopped paying for it because he found that nuance of the 60 minutes. And I sent a bunch of notes to him, and he said, but you're doing 30 minutes. And I was like, right, we're very efficient, which I stand by. We are very efficient. And he was like, okay, well, that's great, but I can't dock your pay because you're doing 30 minutes, but I'm bundling your 92507 and your 92526 that's feeding. And he bundled it, and they did not budge. I fought and fought and fought for probably 6 months. I sent information, I sent data. So it didn't affect the RVU. However, what it did do is they said, well, this is an untimed code. Feeding is also untimed, so just so we can clear that up. But what they did is he said, I cannot, and this is almost a direct quote, I cannot justify paying both codes when the amount of time in front of the patient is 30 minutes. I cannot justify paying 2 untimed codes. And I, at the time, was like, obviously fuming and mad, because I didn't even know anything about this 60-minute, he had found it, and it was kind of buried in CMS. I mean, he went deep into some stuff, and he found it. And honestly, that's where you're going to see the impact. They're going to find ways with untimed codes to start bundling, I think, in my opinion, that they're going to continue to do this. They're going to continue to find ways to take these untimed codes and bundle them and say, we cannot justify this because when you provide us notes, you're doing 30 or 45 minutes or whatever. So we're going to bundle these. And they can, and what Blue Cross told me is, we can do what we want because we're a private entity. And I was like, okay, I have zero argument with that. And they can't. So it's just, again, if you take a lot of Blue Cross, I think it's something to think about. Rick, you tell me if I'm wrong. Timed codes, there's no bundling of them, right? That's not a thing. You don't bundle, it's untimed.
There are some codes that cannot be paid the same day when done with another code, so that does happen sometimes. But but like when you look at, say, therapeutic exercise, neuromuscular education, therapeutic activity, manual therapy, we can do all those codes on the same day for just about all the payers and be paid for all those codes.
I can give an example, especially for our adult listeners. One of those examples of not billing together would be a modified barium swallow study cannot be billed the same day as a barium swallow study with a GI doctor, right? So those are 2 codes that can't be billed in the same day. And those come from edits, the NCCI edits. And those aren't out yet either, which will place more rules, probably, maybe, on our timed code. So we don't even have all of the information yet on the time codes of what can and can't be billed together. Now, our friends over at ASHA have said to us directly that they don't anticipate the feeding and swallowing dysphagia code to be impacted anywhere, that it still is untimed, and for adults, it can still be used with these timed codes. So that is a benefit there that we'll talk about in a future podcast. But for pediatrics with the timed codes, that is a benefit where it would be an add-on if they're paying for it and a way to generate more revenue.
It's something to think about with untimed codes. It is starting to become an issue, at least in my state. Our Medicaids bundle a ton of these untimed codes. So we are not getting credit, reimbursed, whatever you want to say. There's 1 or 2 Medicaids that do not pay feeding for speech therapy. So they'll do 92507 and 92526, which is feeding. It's bundled as 92507. So it's just, again, it's something to think about, that the states are doing it with Medicaids. My Blue Cross is doing it. If your Blue Cross is doing it, it's something to think about. I, in my opinion, don't think they're going to just unbundle it because there's now a G code. So it's just, again, it's something to think about. It's something to think about if you do a lot of feeding, because if you do a lot of feeding and you have timed codes, I know this wasn't a podcast on the feeding, but I'm just giving everybody something to think about, that if your payers are bundling your speech and your feeding codes together, all of a sudden, I guess, unbundled when there's timed codes. So it's just, again, something to think about when you're really reflecting on how your practice operates and what are you not getting reimbursed for now. There's a really good chance that you will in the future.
Yes, great points. Stuff to think about there.
And the NCSAT edits will come out right around December 1, going into effect on January 1 of 2027.
Yeah, a 1 month notice.
Yep.
From a clinician's perspective, something I've learned over the last week, because I'm a business owner, but I don't bill these codes. I bill the nursing homes directly, and the only code I interact with is the CPT code for fees. So I guess I didn't understand when pediatric companies are putting in for their reimbursement, they are not submitting times. So the way that these insurance companies will collect the data is through that audit that Rick mentioned. So the way that any data or information would come would be, we're auditing you, we're looking at the charts, and now we're seeing how much time has been given. So it's not like we're feeding these insurance companies or Medicaid a ton of data with our notes. But there could, and this is something that we've said too, even with the timed codes, we're putting ourselves at risk for audits, and that SLPs will have to change how they document for these timed codes because they're going to be looking for errors and mistakes. But same thing with the G code now, if they're auditing, they could be looking at the time. So there has been a lot of information pushed out online to SLPs over the last week or so since these have come out. One thought process out there is, or I guess two, we need to work on the value, but also we need to reallocate the intensity of what we're doing. We need to reallocate the spread of face-to-face versus training parents and training caregivers. Is that possible, Rick? How do we go about communicating that to CMS if it's something we want to touch on in a comment?
Yes, I think what you're asking is it possible to reallocate, and just using the new G code, the 5 minutes of pre, the 15-minute of intro, and the 5 minute of post. Is it possible? Sure, I can't say it's not possible. Do I think it's realistic? I don't. I mean, 92507 has been that way for years. The 10 new codes went through the RUC process, and I can't recall which ones exactly, but I remember going through the RUC process where these codes get the RVU values. I remember at that time there was some more minutes on the pre and the post on the new codes compared to the face-to-face time, and the RUC committee took away the minutes of the pre and the post. They decreased those minutes and had the face-to-face, I think, be 30 minutes face-to-face. So that kind of already went through that process, and then CMS is proposing to accept the RUC recommendations. So basically, you'd have to go back to what was originally proposed to the RUC and the pre-service time and the post-service time and try to argue why those minutes are correct in that, and then why to decrease the face-to-face time. But again, I would say the G code is untimed. Okay, so from a billing perspective, technically speaking, 30 minutes you can build the code. Technically speaking, 15 minutes you can build the code. Obviously just upon an audit, are you possibly at risk if you continuously only see people for 15, 20, 25 minutes? If the insurer feels you did not do everything included within the code, you didn't meet the needs of the child, you were doing it from your own perspective to make money, it's just that risk. But is it possible? Yes. Do I think it's going to be successful? In my opinion only, no.
I think what I want to start to wrap up with is increasing value. Is it possible in our comments to CMS to try to get them to increase the value? Have you seen that happen before where value has increased after a comment period? Is it possible? And what might we want to speak to if we want, because I think we all need to address value. Value is a problem across the board. We need to be paid more. How do we do that effectively, if at all?
And again, unfortunately, under the Medicare physician fee schedule, we have this thing called budget neutrality. So when some CPT codes get an increase in RVUs, other CPT codes have to have a decrease in RVUs because they can only go up so much in a percentage from one year to the next. So obviously now the downside for speech is, all the speech codes took a hit this year. Where last year, for this year 2026, all the speech codes saw an increase in payment. The PTOT codes all went down in payment. 2026. In 2027, it's the opposite way. PTOT codes saw, the RVUs of some of these codes go up 0.02, 0.03, where the speech codes went down. So now it's like going back to argue, especially I think on the speech sound production base code and the add-on code, and the speech sound production language comprehension expression combo code and the add-on code. I think those are the two codes you try to make an argument on the practice expense side, because I know when I saw it coming out of the ruck, that PE dollar amount was significantly higher for those codes compared to 92507. But then as you go through that complicated CMS process, the formula percentages and all of that, that's how code spits out the PE RVUs for those codes. So I know it's going to be a tough one for your followers to maybe handle, but this may be one you have to talk to somebody at ASHA to see what's the best way to formulate comments on the PE RVUs for perhaps some of the base codes and the add-on codes. What argument could we make to try to get an increase in those RVUs that would then increase the overall payment?
And what exactly is included in the practice expense?
So the practice expense is really the cost to run a practice. So this would be your support personnel, like your front office person, your billing person, the rent, mortgage, supplies, equipment, utilities, internet, things like that. Where the cost of a speech language pathologist, that's in the work RVU. That's his or her mental effort, judgment, stress, knowledge, intensity to provide the service.
No, I was just going to say about the allocation is, if you listen to what Rick is saying, is he didn't say, no, it's impossible. But he did say, based on him doing this for over 20 years, and I take that as, expert opinion. You're going to call it like in a court case, essentially. But I think it's important to recognize that none of us have been through this. None of us have paid attention. I have not been an SLP for that long. However, I'm sure the ones who have not really paid attention to this process. And so I think it's important to listen to the people who have been through this, who understand the trends of AMA and CMS better than the average, provider or clinician. And I think it's really important to listen to that, but it's also really important to go, okay, I'm listening to that, and then how does that, again, bounce off of how I practice or how I operate my business or how I am as an employee. I think it's all super important to go, okay, if the allocation, he's saying, them basically, if we reallocate all of this, it sounds to me that we've got to go back through a process. And that's not something that he created or I created. It's something that CMS and AMA has created, and it's been there. It's not, SLPs aren't going to shake that up and decide, oh, we're special and we get to just skip steps 1 through 3. There's a lot of very, very systematized processes that have been ongoing and have been established for years. And so there's just an awareness of that and a recognizing that, hey, this is the way this goes. I don't like it either, I promise you. It was way over my head for most of this stuff, but recognizing that, okay, there is a process for a reason. And if we go and ask for something like this allocation, like, hey, we want different, we want the face-to-face to be reduced and all of this. Okay, if we ask for that, why Rick's probably saying that it's not going to happen is because of the actual fact that we have to go back through a process for that. So when you understand the basis of why he's saying that, you kind of go, okay, well, I don't know if we want to ask for that, if that makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense to ask for that, then I don't want us to spend our time and energy going that route, because it's just going to be a hard no, it seems like, because of the fact that we'd have to go back through a process. So I just, again, want to point out that it's important to make sure you go to the experts in the field, but also bounce that off of kind of common sense and going back to, how is this process supposed to be and how has this process always been? Because it's not going to change because SLPs decided to get into the mix, unfortunately.
For every 0.01 RVU you can try to get a CPT code increase by, it adds about roughly 33 cents to that CPT code. So when you look at just to kind of give you an example here, your 92X2X, which is your 30-minute speech sound production, the PE RVU for that is 1.10. When you look at the base for language comprehension and expression, 92X4X, the PE is 0.51. Now, when you look at the combo, speech, sound production, and language comprehension and expression, I know people think, well, we should just add 1.10 plus 0.51, have it come out to 1.61. For that code, the PE is only 1.17, which was significantly lower than we all thought. So do I think that could be, a code? Again, you have to probably work with somebody at ASHA, that went through this process, or somebody, SLP on the RUC committee that understood how this all went through and the dollar amount that was assigned to it, the direct input and all that. But what if you could get that from 1.17 to 1.2? That could be an extra dollar. Can you get to 1.21? Could it be an extra $1.33, for that base code? And then some of that would maybe then add on to the add-on code perhaps. So again, not saying it can't be done, but you're going to have to do some work. And again, no offense, no one's experts probably watching this podcast on this, so you're going to have to, use ASHA or somebody else to help you formulate those letters.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of ASHA, in their webinar, which I was not able to attend but have been briefed on many times, they mentioned that there was an interested party that got what they wanted. And referring to this movement and all of us. To be clear, this is not what we asked for. This is not what we were fighting for. We were not fighting for this G code and these options and a devaluation. So just to put that out there, ASHA, that's not what we were asking for. And didn't I say ASHA is setting the stage to blame this on Fix SLP, me, us, whatever? Didn't I say they were setting the stage, and what did they do? So ASHA has stated publicly in their webinar that this is not the direction that SLP should be going, and they will be fighting the G code with CMS. This is my opinion, and my opinion only, but they came out with that thought pretty quickly. There is not one person on the HCEC committee who understood anything more than Rick or anyone else. Okay, they're not fairies that have all of this additional information that no one else knows. It is my belief that they came out with that statement for self-preservation. They haven't taken a look at, is this G code actually better for private practices and clinics in pediatrics versus the 10 codes? They didn't take time to consider that at all because they came out with that statement pretty quick. And they're not listening to their constituents either, because there are people saying this could be better for us. ASHA is always going to self-preserve. They have been showing this to us for years, and especially through this process. They have lost control of this narrative with this G code that surprised them as much as it has surprised us. So just remember that because they're saying they're going to fight it doesn't mean it's better or worse. I'd take their stance with a grain of salt. Like Rick said, do some work. Think about this. Think about what's best for your practice. If you are an employee of someone, maybe talk to the business owner and say, how can we support this? Because I want to continue with the package I have. What are you seeing in the work you're doing? If you are a business owner, you can join AAPP SPA. That is for business owners only. You can also take a course from Rick. Rick, while not an SLP, has been in the billing and coding space for many years across different practices and sees the patterns, like Emily said. There is a course that he is having that is, if I drop this when I hope to, the course will have already happened. So Rick, can people go back and buy the recording? Is that going to be an option, or will you have another date available? How's that going to work if people have listened today and want more education?
Yeah, thank you. It'll be on my website, which is GawendaSeminars.com. So GAWENDA seminars, GawendaSeminars.com. And you can put your cursor over the word courses. It'll have a drop-down menu. You can click on demand, and then you'll see the webinar there. Scroll down your first look at the 2027 new therapy codes. So I'll say this will be probably about a 2-hour webinar where I'll go through the 10 codes, go through the G code, go through all the RVU values, payment, possible NCCI edits, documentation tips. We'll talk about MPPR, the multiple procedure payment reduction policy, and how that may or may not impact what you get paid. And we're going to talk about how much time you must do with a 30-minute code, how much with a 15-minute code, and we're going to do 6 billing scenarios. Well, I'll tell you, here's what you did. And here's the correct answer. If you're using the new codes, here's the correct answer if you're using the G code. And Emily was kind enough to, give her input on the 6 as well. So we feel pretty good about the 6 we put together.
And I got to see them. They're a bang-up job. They're great. I won't be there live, but I will be watching the playback. Rick, just for our SLPs, do your courses offer ASHA-approved CEUs?
No, unfortunately, because I do so many webinars and some of them spur of the moment, I just don't have the time.
Do you give a certificate of attendance?
Yes, everyone listening can print out a certificate of attendance that ASHA may or may not accept for CEUs, or your state may or may not accept, but it does have the course title on it, my name, the date, and all that.
Because Rick is not familiar with Fix SLP before the 92507 debacle, he doesn't know that we've already educated all of you that you do not need ASHA-approved CEUs a lot of the time. If you're unsure about what your state does, don't forget, or if you're new to Fix SLP, you can head to our website, fixslp.com. I have a very chaotic state map because it is the wild, wild west. It is color-coded. But remember, friends, even ASHA doesn't require ASHA-approved CEUs. And remember, ASHA CEs are made up by ASHA as a way to take your money. Those happen when you pay for their tracker. Our friends at Speech Therapy PD, as a result of this movement, have built out their tracker and have made it free to everyone, so you can upload your certificate in less than 2 minutes. I always time myself because I like to give the truth here as much as possible. In less than 2 minutes, you can take that e-certificate from Rick, put it on Speech Therapy PD, and it's there. You can print a transcript if you need it. You're set to go, okay? There are several states that you have to take their state approved or the ASHA approved. That's not the majority. So if you're not sure, look at our map, okay? So everyone can get, we call this PDH, professional development hours. Everyone can get PDH. So, and it's not just for business owners, right, Rick? Anybody can take this for a full understanding, and they should walk away knowing what you've said.
It can be an SLP, a biller, your office manager, your administrator, anybody can listen to this webinar.
I would highly recommend billers take it, not just your clinic directors or your business owners. I think we had at least 3 or 4 courses that we had in the past, and our billers very much said that it was very helpful.
Yeah. And again, we all need to understand this. Your employer will tell you what they want, but you still need to have an understanding of what's going on because it's changing. It's changing. Okay. And just to be clear and transparent, this was not a paid sponsored ad. Rick has not asked us. We are saying this because I am not the expert. Emily's not the expert. Our private business owners could go to APSPA, but there are also a lot of other SLPs out there, and y'all saw what ASHA gave you, okay? So Emily and I may be back next week. We have some adult things to talk about. I have concerns. I need to put pen to paper to really work out my concerns, and maybe then check with Rick to make sure that I'm on the right track. All right, everybody. I'm sweating in this business office here at the Hampton Inn in our nation's capital. So I'm going to say thanks for fixing it, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to the Fix SLP podcast, the podcast shaking up the field of speech-language pathology. Don't forget to check out our social media or fixslp.com for our latest promo codes for continuing education, therapy materials, merch, and more. Supporting our sponsors also supports our Fix SLP team. Don't just listen, be a part of the change. Share this episode and our social media content, and let's keep fixing the field one bite at a time.